Aloha, I'm Tina Leah with Hawaii Unites. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation and protection of our environment and natural resources. And health and the environment are interconnected, which of course is why we have taken the state agencies to court over here in Hawaii to stop their release of experimental lab-altered mosquitoes, which they've started here on Maui, ground zero for the project. And you can find out more about that. We've been compiling a lot of research about the risks of that project and about our court case. And you can donate to support the work that we're doing, help us keep moving that case forward. It can affect everybody around the world. We're hoping to set a precedent here for environmental law and for stopping these types of experiments that haven't been studied for the risks to our health, for the health of our people and wildlife and the INA. So uh, hawaiiunites.org is our website, and please take a look over there and help support the work we're doing. Today, we're very excited to be talking to a professional in the field of animal health. He is sharing our concerns about biotech experiments and the dangerous direction that our world is headed in. This is Roger Meacock, a holistic veterinarian you may be familiar with from the UK, member of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. He has been working in cutting-edge medical technologies for over 25 years. He's the veterinary advisor and ambassador to the People's Food and Farming Alliance. Meacock has voiced concerns about the high risks and unintended consequences of novel biological interventions. We're definitely going to be talking about that. He says these technologies are expanding at a pace that doesn't allow for sufficient safety studies. He's also speaking out about the risks of experimental injections in animals. Welcome, Roger. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for arranging the Zoom to have a chat, because I think we're very much on the same page. And yeah, it's just interesting to see how different branches of everything are sort of going in the same wrong direction, really, is probably the quickest way of describing it, isn't it? We 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 like to think, or scientists like to think, that they understand biology to a certain level. And I know certainly when I qualified, when I first started a couple of years, I thought, oh, I know a lot. And then I suddenly realized after 30 years of practice that, I don't know 95% at all. I think I'm probably lucky if I know 0.5%, and I know a million times more than I did when I thought I knew 95%. And I think, it is hubris and greed that is taking things in the wrong direction. And but we need people to be aware of the rate of the dangers of it. And that's great to have a chat about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We want to know a little bit more about what got you interested in working with animals and what it means to be a holistic veterinarian. What is that focused on? And if you want to tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I first qualified as a very conventional vet, and went into farm animal practice because I liked the outdoor life. Very quickly realised that the government was still, was attacking farming, really back in the 1990s, and I thought it had a finite end to it. And so I widened what I did to include horses, and then I, in trying to prove that the complementary alternative side didn't work, I found that it did. And I think that's quite a common way for those in the medical and veterinary field who find complementary medicine. A lot of them do come from that sort of other side of skepticism, and then but open-mindedness, and try something to try and find whether something really does work or not. And when you find that it does, then you say, well, I've got a choice. I don't necessarily understand it. It wasn't necessarily what I was taught at uni, but it works. It seems to be effective in some ways, better than what I'm already doing or thought I was doing. And you've got a choice. Do you stick your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist? Or do you say, well, actually, I want to do the best that I can for my patients, and you go with the best thing that you think you've got. So that's really where I started off, and then I was very lucky that I got involved with some Russian technology based on a microcurrent biofeedback, and then bioresonance, and looked into the science of it because obviously conventional medicine will say there's no science to any of this woo-woo. And then once you realize actually the science we were taught at school is completely wrong and we're not particles, we're actually waves and fields, then frequency becomes so much more, um, obvious as a good way of influencing the body. And then you start to realize actually how little we know, and we mess with things at our peril when we don't fully understand them. So that's really where I came from. And then, you know, the, I suppose the last 4 years, I was latched on very early on to realize that things weren't as we were being told. And then there was talk of doing the mRNA platform for people, and I thought that was a bad idea, and looked into it and realized that the platform obviously had that potential and was already being expanded into animal medicine. There is already an mRNA jab in use in pigs in the USA. Somehow got its license before the definition for vaccine had been changed, which I'm not quite sure how that happened really, but
Yeah,
it
I
did.
think what was the year that that was it? I thought it was before
Yeah, it was
I would have
2018.
expected. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
2018.
But
I think
okay.
even if you look back at some of the literatures on that I've managed to find, there's even a question mark whether it even started before that.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also discovered Dr. Richard Fleming and Dr. Kevin McCairn fairly early on in the whole COVID um, situation. And Kevin was a neuroscientist, and I found what he was saying about prions very interesting. And obviously, with having seen BSE myself over here in the UK in the 1990s, and actually was attacked by a cow that had it on one occasion.
Tell us what BSE,
Bovine spongiform encephalopathy. It's
that
one of
is
the
mad cow. Is that mad
yeah,
cow disease?
it's the
Okay.
it's the mad cow disease. So obviously, and the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is the human variant of that. So my alarm bells started ringing when there was talk about how mRNA itself could potentially initiate prion formation, not and as well as the proteins that it could direct a body to produce. And so my concern obviously is that if those you know that whole platform gets used in veterinary medicine, especially amongst animals for our food chain, then we are potentially at risk of having prion contaminated meat.
And
Um,
and you're saying that is already potentially happening because without anybody knowing it, I would say if it goes as far back as 2018, this has already been in the food chain potentially.
Quite probably.
Okay.
And it's interesting that they've chosen pigs because pigs are one of the species which is actually more resistant to prion diseases. So, they're not going to manifest it. And of course, they're slaughtered fairly young in their lives for they're grown quickly, slaughtered young, so they won't necessarily manifest any neurological problems themselves. But it doesn't mean that the prions aren't present in the meat. And with the jab, it's called Sequivity, and so it was licensed in 2018, we think, but possibly before. But the way that it works is that it's not even a final product that's licensed; it's a process. So what happens is the vet will go along to, for example, a herd of pigs that have got some sort of respiratory disease. They'll swab them. They'll send the swabs off to the lab. The pathogen will be identified, sequenced. A gene of interest will be chosen with regard to producing a protein that exists on the virus outer capsule, um, and then the mRNA will be developed to direct that protein production, and then the mRNA platform is then made into a vaccine, inverted commas, because they're not really vaccines, um, sent back to the farm or back to the vet, and then they're injected. And that whole process takes 8 to 12 weeks.
And
So,
when you're talking about the protein, is that anything to do with the like a spike protein, or is that a whole other concept? Or when you say
yeah,
protein, what does that mean
yeah,
exactly?
Yeah, viruses have a number of different proteins on their surface. I mean, like for like the avian flu one is H5N1 because there's two different types of proteins that they use to identify different strains, but there are more proteins on the surface of the virus itself. But the work has been done within the whole prion research field to show that viral proteins on their own, as well as whole viruses, can trigger protein misfolding, which is the basis for prion disease and also amyloidosis. And so when a protein is chosen um, and the body is producing it, and as we know also from the human last few years, because of other contaminant inclusions and frame shifting that happens with pseudouracil within the whole mRNA platform, they might even be producing proteins that they don't even know that are being produced. And so, if any of those proteins have the ability to start protein misfolding, it's a bit like, when you're at school and you had a strong solution, an ionic solution, and you put a seed crystal in, and then the crystal just started growing because the solution just added to it. Well, prion formation is a little bit like that. So once you've got prions going into the body, they will continue over time to cause further protein misfolding. And obviously, when it goes into the neurological tissues, which is what happens with the spongiform encephalopathies, then you get the mad cow disease or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in people. And so that's the danger that they get that they're getting a body, whatever species, it could be pigs, or they're talking about doing it in cattle as well now, or sheep. There's an mRNA jab that's being looked at in Australia for border disease in sheep. Um, so if if those meats start having prions in them, and then obviously go into our food chain, cooking it doesn't get rid of the prions. And so yeah, one meal isn't going to kill you, but if every meat meal that you have has got or a significant proportion of them are having to have this, get these prion materials within them, then it becomes a cumulative thing. And I know that prions they're sort of termed as highly indestructive is a phrase that's being used because they freezing them, heating them, even autoclaving them doesn't get rid of them. And I know from speaking to Dr. Anthony Chafee that he's a he's a neurosurgeon, and sterilization of the instruments they use for brain surgery doesn't doesn't necessarily kill them. So they've got to be
Wow.
very careful that they don't pass Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease from one patient to another. Um,
How does that disease, what are the, symptoms or syndrome of that? Is that like a cognitive and
yeah, it's
physical and
yeah, it's sort of yeah, sort of neurodegeneration. So sort of obviously there'd be some sort of cognitive change, and then there'd be shaking motor function, and it can be very slow onset. So it can take years for it from the initial infection to develop. Um, but then once it does start developing, it's an exponential increase, and so the sort of the onset then develops very rapidly. So there was some researchers who were working in a lab who had an accident, um, and two of them died, but it took something like 7 or 8 years from the accident before they started manifesting symptoms, but 6 months from that point to then die. So, it can be quite quick. I mean, it can take longer. Could potentially be decades as well. But it's there are no safe levels of prion in the body. Um, and this is, again, one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because I was thinking, well, the mosquitoes are spreading Wolbachia, but what happens if they were if they were seeded with something else? What everything has this duality, doesn't it? things can be used for good, and we know there's a lot of things that are being used for not so good things and evil things intentions as well. So my
Right.
concern is where does this all go? And that's
Yeah.
really my overall concern that I think people need to be aware of.
And I think we're definitely on the same page with that, is that these government agencies, regulatory agencies, you've even said when you're speaking out about this, that they seem to be in denial, that these new technologies haven't been studied enough. And, in our case here, and it sounds like even in the case, with these injections in the livestock, the experiment is happening in real time on us,
Yeah, yeah.
and that is absolutely not acceptable, not lawful in any way. And we're pushing back and challenging that here. And you're right, that the mosquitoes could be used, if there's a bad agent that gets in here somewhere along the line in the manufacturing or out in the field. We have concerns about that, and we haven't seen anything from these agencies that are supposed to be, here looking out for us and our environment and our health. We're not seeing anything where they've documented protocols to show us that they're even looking out for that, protecting for that. No biosecurity protocols have been documented. We are not seeing where the pathogen screenings, they're not disclosing that information. So we don't even know what pathogens they're being screened for, let alone, you know, yeah, there are other issues to worry about that come along with bacteria and molds and, I don't even know. We don't
Well,
know. We can't
precisely.
see the manufacturing process, so we don't even know what they might be looking
No.
for or not looking for.
I mean, I sort of think, very often what happens in the micro happens in the macro as well, and I can't think of any program which has been done with biology in the past where, cane toads were introduced into Australia to try and keep a pest down there. And, there have been similar programs, gray squirrels got into the UK, and apart from the Isle of Wight and a few other places, pretty well killed off all the red squirrels. So we know that once you start introducing, non-native species into situations, that it never ends well. All the red kites that were being released in the UK because they thought they were an endangered species are now killing all the songbirds and are completely out of control. So, this is my I sort of see those programs. To me, those are the experiments that we've seen in the past, and we're not learning the lessons from them, because we know that if you mess with an ecology in that way, it doesn't end well, and things mutate as well. We know that. So even if you think you're releasing something that's safe, you can bet your bottom dollar it'll mutate, and maybe it'll mutate into something you wish you hadn't let the genie out the bottle.
And
So it's and that's really the basis of my concerns. And I'm not saying I've got a crystal ball to say it's definitely going to happen, but the onus is on those who are doing it to prove that it can't happen. And I don't think that it's possible for them to be able to do that. And
yeah,
and that's really, I don't have to prove my case, because what I'm saying is conservative, and has got safety in mind. What they are doing is reckless, and it's up to them to prove that it isn't, and I don't think that they can.
right. It's the precautionary principle where they need to err
Yeah,
on the side of caution when it's an unknown. And yeah, in this case here, what's really outrageous is that this project with the mosquitoes is supposed to be about protecting native birds that are endangered, and we've lost many, of the native bird species here, because one of the big reasons is that years ago they brought in the mongoose, uh, in order to, attempt to take care of a rat problem. And it turned out, which of course they should have known this ahead of time, but this is what we're talking about, that the rats are up at night and the mongoose in the daytime. And so now we just have a mongoose and a rat problem. And so the same concept of let's bring this into, let's bring more of something invasive in to fix an invasive problem. It just makes no sense, even on its face without all the details of the serious risks. But just right off the bat, it's like, what? I can't believe anybody would think it sounds like a good idea, especially in the hands of, you know, our government agencies are not looking out for us. That they're just
Well,
not. And especially here locally, we can see it. So many things have happened in the last, year or so where it's really clear that it's not about making sure that the people are safe.
I mean, it just strikes me as ridiculous, isn't it? Because obviously birds eat a lot of insects, and if you're going to start killing off insects by spreading Wolbachia, and we know that things accumulate. You've got your sort of your sort of bottom of the food chain. Everything that happens with them sort of accumulates and concentrates in the higher levels, in the predators at the top. And if you're going to be killing off back insects that, not necessarily the ones, not just mosquitoes, but as I understand it, Wolbachia can go to other insects as well. And so, you're going to reduce your pollinators. So even the birds that drink nectar are going to struggle to find to find flowers. And then you've got other insects being reduced in population as well. So other birds are going to find there's less food around. And then we're adding 5G and everything else on top to kill the insects as well. And you're thinking, well, so we're protecting birds, but we're doing everything in other directions to actually take away their food source. And we're wondering what they're going to live on,
Yeah.
and then it, the net is so widespread. The ramifications are just, more than they've obviously considered, and they get so focused, don't they? They see one good thing, and they focus so heavily on it. They don't realize that in trying to do that one good deed, they're doing 10 inhibitory things on the side, and the overall summation of one plus versus 10 negative is actually pretty negative.
Well, I think that they're looking a lot at the dollar signs over here for sure. We've seen millions of dollars, continuing to come in for these projects. I do believe that there are people involved that actually think that they've found the only thing that's going to save the birds because these biotech companies have sold them a bill of goods and they want to believe it. Um, but they're not following their own guidelines even for protection of the environment. And then, a lot of the aspects of what they're doing here, they're openly admitting that they're not responsible for monitoring the effects of the mosquitoes on the native birds that this project is supposed to be about. They've done zero studies, you know. Yeah, they definitely don't know what might happen with other insects. They
No.
haven't even looked at that. I mean, they will say, Wolbachia is in insects all around us and et cetera, et cetera. But they have done no studies with the strain of Wolbachia they're bringing in, which is a foreign organism that is, originating somewhere in the manufacturing process, according to their documents. It's
Well,
originating from Kuala Lumpur, so it's a foreign organism. So whether or not Wolbachia may be here in, they haven't even tested to see, they can't just make these broad statements that it's in this many insects and which strain and, particularly definitely not the strain they're bringing in from a foreign country, but they haven't done any tests as far as whether this bacteria, which we've seen peer-reviewed studies that show it can cause mosquitoes to become more capable of transmitting diseases, including the avian malaria that they're supposed to be,
yeah,
focusing on suppressing here, but zero studies.
it's
This
it's
is the
bonkers, isn't it?
experiment. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's that whole idea within biology where something that's used, as a perhaps a negative feedback in one biological pathway actually has got a positive feedback mechanism in another one. So you can't just look at one pathway in isolation without understanding what's going on. They're talking about doing some CRISPR-9 technology in pigs to get rid of a certain receptor in the lung tissue, because it will stop PRRS virus from you know getting in and causing respiratory disease. But I looked at that receptor to see what else it did, and actually it blocks African swine fever. So okay, so what's worse? You're going to try and reduce, both of them have got huge economic implications for the pig industry, but it's that whole duality, isn't it? That they focused on the fact that this receptor, it's if it's not there, the PRRS can't get a foothold, but they totally ignoring the fact that actually when it is there, it stops African swine fever from getting a foothold. So, they're going to close the door to PRRS, but open the door to African swine fever. And I gather in the last few days, the World Health Organization has said there's an emergency in Germany because they've had one case of African swine fever in a wild boar. And you think, well, gosh, where we go again? Where one case is not an emergency, and has it actually been isolated, or was just that a PCR test that got overcycled as well? It's where does the stupidity and the madness end? Because it's very difficult to be rational. I mean, I'm very, very happy to adopt new practices for how I work, provided I know that they work, and provided there's a rationale behind it, and provided I'm not doing any harm. But when there's so much false information used to justify doing something, then it actually makes it very difficult to assess what the true situation is. And then you actually do a little bit of digging, like you've done, obviously, and you actually realize there's a whole nother page or chapter to this book that they are conveniently refusing to look at, or hidden, or whatever else. It's
Right. And they have
I
their
don't know.
own scientists that have, these huge conflicts of interest. The science that they want
Yeah,
to produce is the science that they're producing. You know,
well,
they
absolutely.
don't want to look at any of the studies we're asking them to do, you know? And so they're producing, or at this point not producing any studies to address the concerns that we have, but at least referencing studies that already to them look like it shows one way or the other that things are looking, acceptable. But yeah, that's basically a lot of the same names come up in the scientific studies, a lot of the people that are involved in the project. And big money is involved. And
Yeah,
here
absolutely.
too, they're talking about this CRISPR, they want to, this is a Trojan horse situation with these bacteria infected mosquitoes because they have all these other, grandiose plans according to their own documents, the agencies that are involved in the project. They want to get into gene drives and CRISPR technology with the mosquitoes. There is even talk, with at least one of these agencies that's part of this partnership talking about genetically modifying forest birds to make them more resistant to avian malaria and then releasing them into the wild. So, I guess if everything goes wrong with this mosquito project, they can just replace the birds with their lab made birds and then tell us it's about honoring the ancestry and culture and history and sacred, lands, of these islands. But I don't, I don't even think at this point that that's what it's about. It's just a pretty big PR propaganda campaign over here.
Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
So many things. I mean,
But
yeah, take a look at our
but it
court
but it's
case.
not a new it's not a new playbook though, is it? I
Yeah.
mean, you look at, I've talked about the squirrels and the cane toads, well, I mean, just so many areas of science that haven't got the justification that they like to say. Vaccines didn't get rid of smallpox, and when you look into it, there's so many other areas of medicine and science where we're fed a narrative, and actually what they use to try and or arguments they try and use to justify the narrative, if you actually do look at the evidence, it doesn't stack up. So it's not that it's a comfort, but they're just they as you say, they found a role play that ends up with producing lots of money for those who've invested in it. And then we've got a few individuals who are heavily investing in all this technology, but then using their billionaire status to influence, to make sure that what they have invested in gets to fruition, and they've got no education, let alone a biological degree. So it's a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Where they're following the dollar, and I don't know quite how we get them to turn around. I mean, this is where people need to be aware, which is why we're doing this, so that everybody can start to put pressure and say, no, we don't accept this. This isn't okay. This has got wider implications for what you think you're going to do and achieve, and it's up to those of them who are pushing it to prove that what they're doing can be done and successfully ring fenced, and that's probably only likely to be proven after many years of doing it. But that's they're going to have to do it in a different way than doing it in the environment first to prove it, to experiment. They've got to find another way of experimenting to at least you know give the environment the chance of not being contaminated with it all.
Yeah, it's especially offensive to me that they wrap this whole narrative up in this pretty package that it's about the environment and about protecting the birds and about the culture here, and it's the exact opposite of that. It's so dishonoring
Yeah.
of protecting the Aina, and that's why we have so much heart in speaking out about it. And I just hope, as far as what can we do about it, I mean, people need to stand up and speak truth. And, hopefully more people can be courageous. That's why I'm so glad to have you here speaking on this because, I know it does take courage to speak out against the mainstream narrative, and especially the last couple years, the last 4 years, I guess, at this point. Yeah, people have been put in a really tough position. So, but now is the time. If we don't speak up and hold these agencies accountable and slow down this agenda, you know, we're in serious trouble. We're in serious, serious trouble because people that are telling us that this is safe have these huge conflicts of interest. And so we no longer live in a world where we can expect that the agencies and the voices of authority and people, in that are doing science and, scientific studies. And, we can't just say, well, we need to trust the science or trust these voices. They're here to look out for us. There's a whole other motivation right now that has taken hold, and it has to do with not just the money, but people wanting to get the accolades and advance their positions and, all of the things that are laid out in conflict of interest, guidelines. And nobody's admitting to their conflicts of interest over here. We brought that up repeatedly. And here we even come to find out that the lead agency here for the state that proposed this mosquito project, their own board voted it through. And this agency has a lab here where they want to mass produce the mosquitoes and release them on the islands into perpetuity forever. Again,
And what
according to their own documents, and then advance into the gene drives and there's all this experimenting going on that we weren't aware of until this all started coming out and we started researching it. But yeah, there's a whole lot more to it, and it doesn't really have anything to do with what they're saying it has to do with, which, if it did, they would have studied to make sure that what they're doing isn't going to have the opposite effect, backfire, and potentially cause the extinction of native birds, affect the entire ecosystem. Everything affects, one thing affects another. They're insects, the health of people. These mosquitoes can transmit diseases to people. It's just outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of obviously don't know your depth of it, but I've seen some work where they're saying, some mosquitoes can increase the transmission of some diseases, and obviously what they're trying to do with Wolbachia is reduce it. But if that increases the transmission of something different, in people, so what happens if these mosquitoes go around biting people and actually they're not the Wolbachia, the strain that they're using suddenly becomes a problem for the people that are being bitten. We suddenly end up with or immune reactions and potentially anaphylactic reactions to that Wolbachia in this new strain of of mosquitoes, then okay, so you've saved the birds, but you killed the human population. Well done. What do they really know? It's this duality again, isn't it? Just because something inhibits something in one direction, there's a good chance that something else will be amplified in a completely different direction, and that they just don't seem to want to grasp that. They just so doggedly going down the one corridor that they forget that there's a whole floor of corridors going off at tangential angles all over the place at the same time, and it just seems utter madness to me, and it's not that I'm saying I understand all those corridors. I just recognize that they're there. And I know that off those corridors there will be doors which lead to high danger because there always are. And
Yeah.
that's really the concern.
I mean, I can say, some of the things, I don't know whether those are concerns that we need to worry about as far as what might come with the Wolbachia itself. It is a bacteria, it's
Mm.
parasitic, it manipulates, the behavior of the host, and there are a lot of issues there. Again, potentially things coming out of the lab, not just pathogens, but molds and germs and uh, but we do have solid information based on peer-reviewed studies of the concerns that they definitely should have looked at before they released these things.
Yeah,
Um, and they still haven't. And that has to do with, the Wolbachia causing the mosquitoes to be more capable of transmitting diseases, including West Nile virus, which birds and people can get, and of course the avian malaria, which if this thing backfires, that's a huge issue.
yeah,
So I mean, this is really complicated. They like to say that this Wolbachia is this safe bacteria. It's all around us. It's kind of the PR story of this product, let's say, and the different variations of this product. But the reality is that is absolutely not true. This essentially could be used as a bioweapon. This
yeah,
Wolbachia has the ability, and as you're saying, some things can be used for good and then for not so good purposes. I would say this Wolbachia is something that could be used for not good purposes if you know that it can cause a certain species of mosquito with a certain strain of Wolbachia and a particular disease to be less capable of transmitting disease, then you might say that's a good thing and we're going to go in that direction. You may also find out in your research that it causes, which they have found out, that it causes certain species with a certain strain and a certain disease to be more capable of transmitting. Well, that
yeah,
is essentially a setup for a bioweapon. And
yeah,
and over here, they haven't even looked at it, to make sure that what they're doing and specific parameters that we've laid out in our court case that we're insisting need to be done at the very least, these studies of this species with this strain and these diseases, none of it's been done. And to top that all off, because this is so unknown, yeah, what if somebody who does know the answer to that question finds a way to use it against us? I'm not saying the people involved in releasing the mosquitoes here are intentionally, planning to
no.
do that. I mean, I wouldn't say some people here aren't concerned about that at this point, but I'm saying without protocols in place and the knowledge in place, how can they protect from a bad agent getting in there?
Yeah. And also it spreads, I know, there's potential for insects can travel on winds long distances, but they can also travel in aeroplanes long distances as well. So, that's not the only vector or just on a wind. So, if planes are landing in Hawaii, all the holiday makers coming in and mosquitoes go into the plane and get carried elsewhere. I mean, who knows where it might spread to? I mean, all these things are possible. They might say, "Oh, it's improbable," or "It's only a small number." It's like, well, from little acorns, big oaks grow. So that's the whole point, isn't it? That once you've let something out into the environment, even if you think you're only doing it on a relatively small scale to begin with, once it's out, you've lost control, and you've got no idea where it could mutate or spread or what unintended consequences that you may or may not have known about or may not even have been able to be known about. Those are the things that can happen that then make you think, well, this is just not good. Not good at all.
Right. And as far as the wind goes, they haven't even looked at that. That's nowhere in their documents, and that's something else we've been pointing out repeatedly. So these mosquitoes with the bacteria are called a biopesticide. And normally you can find numerous studies on pesticide drift, pesticide wind drift, like
Yeah,
chemical pesticides. There seems to be zero studies or information on biopesticide drift, and they certainly haven't looked at it here where, these mosquitoes themselves can drift on the wind to unintended places. So that's a concern. And yeah, absolutely, they could hop onto a plane, on a person, on their luggage, on an animal that gets on the plane. They haven't looked at any of that. And beyond that, as far as how this could affect other places, if this is allowed to continue forward here on Maui. It's absolutely an experiment. They've never used this species of mosquito before
yeah,
with this Wolbachia IIT incompatible insect technique in a standalone field release that's been documented. This is the first time ever with this species. It's the first time they've ever used Wolbachia incompatible insect technique mosquitoes
right.
for conservation purposes. This is the largest Wolbachia mosquito project area of any project in the world to date. So this is a huge experiment happening here. If this is allowed to continue, this is how they get away with this from one place to another, which I can see in seeing how they got away with it up to this point here is by saying, well, we did it over here and everything's, everything looks good according to our studies, right? So they're going to say, we did it on Maui, it's great, and they're going to gear their studies to, whatever perception they want to put out there. And these biotech companies that are getting in here to do their use these islands as a petri dish, you know, they're going to move on to the next place and say, yeah, we did it on Maui. And then they're going to sell it to the next place. And there's all this money involved and grants and public-private partnerships and federal money from the Department of the Interior here is what's funding it at this point that they're admitting to. But, there's a lot of money that continues flowing in. It's like a cash cow type of project. And to be real, if something goes wrong, that's probably even more money. What do they have to do to fix that? you know, they're just
Absolutely.
they're gonna have to do the gene edited mosquitoes, right? Because these ones aren't working anymore. But they were
It's,
working, but you know,
it's
they're
like it's
gonna
like the
they're gonna make
gambler.
the narrative work for them.
It's like the gambler, isn't it? You lose a bet, so I'm gonna have to put more on the next time to make up the loss and win. Before they know it, they're completely bankrupt because they put the whole mortgage on. And they're sort of in
Yeah.
that situation. And this is why I would say to the people who perhaps follow me, or which is why they're watching this. This, although it's happening in Hawaii, is a worldwide issue because we've seen what's happening in other technologies where they do something once, and then they use that as a justification to as you say, suddenly seed it and to use that principle in other areas all around the world, and actually not just to spread it in terms of geography, but actually they're shortening the time frames in terms of how they think they can rush through biological interventions like this. And that's, it's a really dangerous precedent to set. And of course, if they don't monitor something for a long enough period of time, it facilitates that process because that straight away, if you need, I don't know, 5, 10 years to really prove something's safety. Well, if you only look at it for a year and then say, oh, look how safe it is, therefore we can do this program over here, but we can do it quickly in 6 months now because we've proven it over in this place. And then by the time the first place actually does start seeing some really serious adverse effects down the line, it's too late because that technique has been spread around the world everywhere. And instead of being start to finish in 5 years, it's been start to finish in 6 weeks. And they are playing Russian roulette, but they're not. They start off with a six-shooter. Before you know it, they're doing Russian roulette with a Bren gun, and that's really where the time to stop it is at the first step because it is a slippery slope and it's a thin end of the wedge to put a few a few sayings together in one go. But that's how I see this, and I think it is very concerning what they're looking to do in Hawaii for that reason. Obviously, what's potentially going to happen there, but then how that can spread to other countries and maybe other insects, and other things that they might try and then expand it, not just from spreading Wolbachia, but to spreading other things and then maybe nefarious things as well. Biowarfare has definitely been going on. There's no doubt about that. So we've got to be aware, and the time to stop things is at the beginning.
I agree with that. And unfortunately, it's already, out in the environment here, which is irreversible, and they may say that the mosquitoes have, their lifespan and so when they stop, it's done, but the bacteria can live on forever, you know.
Yeah.
That's what we're worried about is that this bacteria, they have not studied it nearly enough to know what could happen in our environment and the effects on health and whether the species of mosquito that they're targeting might be replaced with their lab strain mosquito, and that one might be more capable of transmitting disease. Or, there's even possibility when they suppress one species of mosquito, another species can have a surge in population, and maybe that species transmits a different disease. And so, and these are
Well,
things that they don't want to look at when you try to find, the studies and the documentation of these type of things. They're constantly being hidden from, the public. They want to show the studies that they want to show, but this is absolutely happening, and there are negative consequences to releasing these different types of mosquitoes, and basically the time for some of these things to become apparent, it could be, way down the line and then it's too late. So we're not supposed to be doing live experiments in our environment where we live and where our
no.
wildlife lives.
I mean, even the original mosquito could mutate. I mean, that's what happens, isn't it? There'll be something will happen that will mutate that will make them not so susceptible to the Wolbachia, and maybe that will then give them another parallel trait which makes them more infectious for some other disease as well. So, it's that there's all sorts of connotations and ways in which it can go wrong, and there are more ways that it can go wrong than the one way it can go right. And I think that is, when you're talking about everything's a probability, and I think once you see it in those terms, then you've got to say, well, is that then a sensible step to begin with? Because you don't know how many different ways that it could go wrong, and you don't know how many of them. It doesn't have to go wrong in one way; it could go wrong in 10 ways. Um, and that it's too late, and just for one right way. They as you say, they've got this one target, this one idea of how it's going to be positive, but they've got no quantification as to say, well, okay, what are the possible ways it could possibly go wrong, and what are the chances of those happening? And it's you know actually pretty high.
Right. And if it comes down to the biotech industry and what their motivation is, I think the motivation is to continue making money and to continue pushing these technologies forward and advancing them and finding places where they can test them out in the
Well,
open.
absolutely. I
And
mean, you can
uh,
see, can't you, that ultimately, if they will then use what happens in Hawaii to justify doing something with, tsetse fly or something, or others, or malaria in other countries, So there are more diseases and more insect vectors than what's going on in Hawaii. So you can absolutely see where the dollar signs are flashing like slot machines round their eyes, but that's what they're, and unfortunately that's what they're focused on,
right,
and but it's, as you say, it's too big an experiment to release on the public without considering all aspects of it properly. And with a sort of an independent hat on to say, well, how many dangers are there? How many positives are there? Well, I'm sorry, dangers outweigh the positives. We'll find another way.
right. And that's why we're in court here, because we actually have a process to protect the environment and our health, which is connected to the environment.
Yeah,
And they have skirted around that process and done the least possible that they could do, as opposed to, the comprehensive studies that they are required to do per our environmental laws out here. So, yeah, I love this conversation. I hope you'll come back. There's so much more for us to talk about. I would say, maybe, there are a couple more things I just want to get your take on, because you have spoken out and been courageous enough to stand against the narrative. What would you say to encourage more professionals, medical professionals, scientists, to just speak truth and, to want what we want, more study, as opposed to
absolutely.
silencing those concerns. Like, let's look at these risks.
Well, I think certainly, the medical professions, they've got to, all you got to do is look at the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, and, recognize that, um, if all the clinicians stand up and say, no, we're not party to this because we don't want to put our clients at risk or our patients at risk, then actually we have got a sufficient body if enough people stand up, together. We are strong enough to resist it. And even if you don't want to say no outright, at least question, at least say, look, let's question it. Let's look into the evidence before let's look before we leap. So I would encourage, all scientists to stand up. And, I think we just got to, you just got to stand in your truth, haven't you? You know, and recognize that actually you may think the dollar is coming and therefore it's gonna help you, but actually, if it doesn't work out, you're gonna get sued to hell. And, you know, if you're lucky, and that's it, there could be a lot worse things than losing money, but you could lose the money too. Um, and so, it's in your best interest actually as a scientist to make sure that what you do is right, because, that's that's why we've gone into science, isn't it? Because we know that science isn't set in stone to that degree. We're always learning, we're always evolving. And I think there's one of the quotes that somebody says to me that, I think 60% of everything that's published in a journal is absolutely right, is later proven to be absolutely wrong. Um, and so, you can't rely on journals to that degree. And, Richard Horton, who's the editor of The Lancet, said, maybe half of what's published is simply untrue and unreliable and unrepeatable when it's really looked at. So, you know, we've got to be, as scientists, we've got to be true to the results, and we've got to, be true to the interpretation of it as well, because the only people we're fooling ultimately is ourselves. And when you're messing around with biological interference, these effects can go on for generations. So, it's not just your lifetime that might be being affected. It's your kids, it's your grandkids, it's huge populations. So the biology isn't linear. We've just got to understand that small changes can have huge implications. And what's considered a little intervention is never a little intervention on its own. So it just, you know got to get common sense back to being common. It's badly worded at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would say, a lot of people are losing trust,
Yeah.
in science and in, voices of authority and medical community. And I would think that people that have devoted their life to that would not want, things to continue in that
No.
direction. And we want to be able to trust people that have knowledge that, we can't understand everything. We need people that we can trust to, research it and explain the data to us. And, if we don't have that, then it really kind of degrades, the whole point of those
Yeah.
professions. And so, yeah, that is, we're on the same page with that for sure. And also, anybody involved in these type of projects, from from the scientists to the people out in the field to the decision makers. They may not be here when these effects are more widely known. It could be decades down the line,
Yeah.
but this will be their legacy, you know?
Yeah.
Their names will be I'll be sure of it. I'm taking
Abs-
names. You know what I'm saying? Like, this will be your legacy, that you did not stop to say, um, "Does the mongoose even stay awake at night to eat the rats? A whoopsie." I mean, this is on a huge scale, that could devastate the entire, ecosystem and the health of people, the birds they're supposed to be protecting. And so I would just hope that everybody involved on every level of this project, of the projects that you're, speaking out on, everything to do with things that are just moving so quickly, in these directions of experimental, technologies, biological interventions. uh, they need to slow down and make sure that what they're doing is not going to be, having them be remembered as the people that, cause the irreversible damage to
Yeah.
everything that we hold sacred in this world. So,
Yeah, I think if there's anybody at that sort of level, really the way science is funded has got to change to get the trust back as well. There's got to be a separation and an anonymity to a certain degree between a gap between the funders and the researchers, so that direct pressure cannot be placed on the scientists who are doing the research, so they're not under pressure to produce a result to keep the funders happy, to guarantee the next check coming in, to keep the lab alive. There's got to be a different way that science is funded, so that scientists who are doing the research have the freedom and lack of pressure to produce the result which that is desired by those who are doing the funding. And until we can get to that point, unfortunately, the money does seem to talk. But I think it could easily be set up to have that tier of separation and scrutiny that would bring the trust back. And I think that's the only way the trust is going to come back in the science now.
I like that. That's a good idea to focus on.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask what, this is kind of a dark, bit of a downer, generally conversation when we have to talk about, where things are going wrong here. But what gives you hope with all of this? What keeps you motivated and courageous and bold and hopeful?
Um, I think ultimately, human instinct and nature is on the whole generally good. And so I think, we've got to trust that's where it's going to go. Sometimes you've got to go to dark places for the light to shine that much more brightly. And certainly, the frequency medicine that I practice, and I know that it works, and I know it has the science behind it. I think people are getting more interested in alternative ways, so that's going to be a positive that's going to come out of all of this. I think is people are going to look for new ways, which perhaps when they trusted science, the mainstream science before was telling them that there was no science behind it and that it wasn't any good and all the rest of it. People now go, well, actually, if we were being told that lie now about this thing, then maybe what we were being told in the past about that is actually true. So I think it will make people curious. It will hopefully make people trusting to a certain degree, but they, or they're less trusting to a certain degree, but they've got to that they'll learn to be more responsible for themselves and to take, do their research to see whether what they're being told is actually true or not. And then when people start doing that instead of just blindly believing what they're being told and fed, then the truth will emerge, and the truth will always out in the end. Um, and that's really what I sort of hold out for is, I to the best of my knowledge, I'm doing what I think is true, and certainly the evidence that I've seen from how I know work, I know it is. So, I think if all this sort of concern about where science is going actually makes people more awake and take responsibility for themselves and actually do their own research, and look at lots of other options and not just the one that they're being told, then that in itself will help to bring a better future.
I like it. Well, I'm inspired by the work that you're doing, and
You
I'm
too.
really grateful that you came and had this talk. I think it's really important for us to talk more with people that have a knowledge base and can speak, from a professional place about this. So I'm just grateful, and yeah, it gives me hope to see that, to see you speaking out on important issues that it seems like, you know, not
Oh,
everyone is
your
brave
light is
enough to speak
shining.
out on, but yeah, you're shining the light on it, and
Well,
yeah, I like it.
ditto.
Sometimes things have to get a little rough for us to really dig in and,
Yeah, well,
stand
your
up.
light from Hawaii has reached the UK, Tina. So, so,
Yay!
so strength to your arm for that. So, and I'm sure it'll spread further as well, which is, it's a really important message and a really important subject to discuss.
Great. Well, where can we find out more about you? Roger Meacock, we call you Roger Meacock, MRCVS. We do not do the veterinary, the same. How do you refer to yourself there in the UK? It's different, yeah?
Yeah, well, we started because we're veterinary surgeons. If surgeons are always used to be called Mister, so we
Hmm.
always
Okay.
became Mister, and then I don't know, some ignorant people decided that they wanted to be called doctor. And you're thinking, well, that's a step back. They
Okay.
don't understand the history of doctor and then Mister. So I always see that as a step back. But also because I treat people, I don't, so I could use doctor in front of my name, but because I also treat people as a human practitioner, I don't want to be, put in that position where I could be accused of trying to mislead people by claiming to be a medical doctor. So I don't use the doctor, and I qualified as a surgeon, even though I don't do surgery and do everything to avoid it. So I keep to the old nomenclature and happy to do so. So, but if people Google me, or Natural Healing Solutions is the name of my practice that I work under, um, then my website is naturalhealingsolutions.co.uk. I've also got perhaps a slightly more political website, which is rogermeacock.com, but that then has links to all my other little variations of whatever hat that I'm wearing. So yeah, infamous.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna take another look at that. I did take a look at both of those websites. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there. So I'm super grateful that you came to talk with us. I hope you'll come back. Maybe you'll come visit Hawaii if we can get this mosquito situation under control.
I've been
Come.
once. I've been to Maui and Kauai about
Okay.
20 something years ago. So it's about time I came back. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, they're targeting Kauai with the mosquitoes too. So hurry up and
Gosh.
get over here. All right, awesome. So good to talk to you. We're going to talk again. And yeah, I want to thank everybody that is watching, listening. Please take a look at Roger Meacock's websites and find out more about the work that he's doing. And please go over to our site, hawaiiunites.org, and find out more about our court case to stop these crazy experimental mosquitoes being unleashed in our environment and affecting our health potentially. It's already affecting my health, just the stress of it. But
I'm
anyway,
sure. Yeah,
hawaiiunites.org, and you can support the work that we're doing, hawaiiunites.org /donate. And hopefully we can stop this from happening here so that we can stop it all over the world. So thank you so
brilliant.
much.
Thanks, Tina. Thank you.
Okay, aloha.
Bye bye bye.